Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well today. In this video, we have a handful of things to discuss. We know of a new Grays Market ship and the name of that ship as well as when it's releasing, so we'll be looking at that. We're also going to be discussing the Anvil Odin and some details about that ship that we've seemingly uncovered, which look pretty exciting. We also have some discussion about Squadron 42's release date announcement as well as 4.9 and just some speculation regarding those two. You know, we love to do that on the channel, as well as some talks about the potential of Castra releasing in 2026. All of that and whatever else I can think of in a somewhat timely manner to talk about. So, with that out of the way, if you are enjoying the content and you do want to stick around for more, feel free to subscribe. I do have channel memberships open if you wanted to go the extra mile, and feel free to join the community Discord. I'll link that down below, and I would love to have you there. Outside of that, let's get into a whole bunch of random and exciting news for Star Citizen and some Squadron 42 speculation. Now, you can probably already tell by just the intro, but there is going to be just a lot of data mines or simply just unofficial information from CIG themselves. So, although a lot of this comes from the game files themselves, just keep in mind this is all technically unofficial and just general speculation that we love to do on the channel. That being said, getting into the Anvil Odin concept. Now, this is coming from the Discussing Whatever Discord, the Discord I get most of this information from. Link for that is down below. But coming from that Discord, we have apparently 23 turrets on the Anvil Odin, 10 torpedo launchers, 7 ship hangars, 8,000 SCU of cargo, and then 5 exclusive paints that are included with the concept pledge. Now, again, technically unconfirmed details, but I think things like the ship hangars, we can confidently count most of them. You know, we can see 6 on the outside, on 3 on each side. They look pretty much like normal hangars if they, in fact, are the hangars. And then the 7th one, I'm kind of questioning a little bit because it's like we have this huge, cutout in the back of the Anvil Odin that looks like that's where the 7th hangar could also be. But at the same time, if there is in fact 8,000 SC of cargo, that's probably where you're going to have to store it as well. So it's all a little up in the air, but I certainly cannot wait to hear more details about the Odin. I think the thing that's most exciting to me is that this is like the first capital class ship that is really been designed by CIG in this modern era of ship design that they've had. And that makes me really excited for how it could flow and just in general how it will feel gameplay wise, assuming we get this thing, before or at 1.0. Nonetheless, even though I will never have one, it is certainly a really exciting announcement. And the official announcement will be in roughly 9 days or so. So that's certainly exciting. Now, looking at the new Gray's Market ship, we don't have any pictures or anything like that. And truthfully, I have no idea what this thing will be, but we do have a bit of information from some data mines from 4.8. And that is a little picture here that says, ready or not, here it is. The Basher risk takers wanted this July. Now, if you know anything about the patch cycles currently, at least in 2026, you know that every 2 months we're getting a patch. So this is going to be a part of 4.9. I have really no idea why this is even in the files, truthfully. I don't know if it's something that's being advertised at DefenseCon or something like that. But nonetheless, it's a pretty cool find, and I'm glad we know that this ship will be releasing in July because I know there is a handful of Gray's Market fans, and I certainly think that the mashup of different ships into one weird looking ship is really cool. And I am definitely pumped to see whatever the Basher ends up being. Now, before we get into the discussion about Castra and that potentially releasing in 2026, I wanted to first discuss Squadron 42 and just my thoughts on the release date announcement. I'm very confident at this point that that is happening, not necessarily during DefenseCon, but I think, as many people have been saying, that there's a good chance we see it at Summer Games Fest. Now, of course, last week we had Jared confirm that Squadron 42 was releasing in 2026 on the Inside Star Citizen, and there has been so much mention of the UEE fleeing back to Seoul for this emergency business that they have to take care of. And I think at this point it couldn't be any more obvious. It really is just a matter of when, and that's when Summer Games Fest really comes into play. Now, I think for some expectations I have for myself personally for this announcement, even if it isn't at Summer Games Fest, is the fact that we should be getting pre orders alongside this. And I can assume we're going to have multiple variations of pre orders. So, obviously, stuff that associates with Star Citizen, maybe some deluxe pre orders or whatever that have like physical or, digital items. And in general, I think it's really just going to be a small information drop alongside this announcement that will kind of get people excited for the future. Now, as to when this release date will be, I think it's probably going to be around October if they're confident in the release, given the fact that that is the anniversary month for CIG. Now, of course, we have the whole GTA 6 behemoth coming the month after on the 19th, and that is a pretty big one that CIG obviously wants to avoid, but I'm not sure exactly what their thought process is on avoiding that. So, whether or not that's going at the very end of 2026, like a December Christmas drop, or again doing October, it's really up in the air, but I think it's certainly going to be one of the two. Now, I don't really think that we're going to get like a humongous information drop alongside this. I certainly think that CIG will loosen up about talking about Squadron 42. But again, I think they're really going to just give us the release date, a little bit of details about the game, a new trailer, and then pre orders. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this one specifically because there's plenty of theories to be had. I think the most common one is the Summer Games Fest announcement, just because that seems like a pretty damn solid time to do that announcement. That being said, though, if you have any other thoughts, please leave them down below. I'm super pumped for this, and I'm sure everyone has their own kind of idea as to how this announcement will go. Now, keeping up with the speculation talk, we're going to be discussing 4.9 and what we could see in that patch. Again, this part is heavily speculation, so I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. Although we do have confirmed features that are happening in 2026, I can't sit here and confidently say that 4.9 will necessarily be the release date for some of those features, though I do want to give my own thoughts as to what those could be. Now, there are certainly a large number of things that could arrive in 4.9. I want to be a little bit more on the realistic side, but I also think that there is the potential that we see some pretty big things. The first one I think is, pretty obvious is going to be Siege of Orison and the new instancing tech. Now, the reason why I am kind of convinced on this one specifically is because instancing seems to have work being finished in July, as a lot of features have been, on the progress tracker. When they finish their work, it has typically been around whenever that feature is actually released. Also, alongside that, we do know that there was supposed to be an instancing tech preview, at some point in this like near-ish future. They talked about it actually a couple weeks ago, but we just haven't heard anything else outside of that. But that being said, given the fact that they actually have been wanting to test instancing this early on, it does kind of put a lot of faith into my mind that we're actually seeing that in 4.9. Now, typically, with especially how 2025 went, I really wouldn't assume we would get much more outside of that first introduction of instancing, but it is 2026, and they've been pretty kind of confident and pushing towards some of these features in the last couple of patches. Things like crafting and the new inventory came alongside Rock Cracker, which are pretty massive things altogether, and those were all combined in one patch. Same thing with 4.8, a bunch of different features and new systems alongside tactical strike groups. Obviously, it's, making for a bit of a rough start for the patch, but they are certainly pushing towards getting more rather than less. So, what could go alongside Siege of Orison? I do think that we could have the potential of seeing the Sand Valakar as well. The reason why I'm somewhat more convinced of this is the way they've been talking about the Valakar. They've been working on it a ton in monthly reports, as well as Jared saying they're kind of putting on the final touches. As Zach Priest has mentioned that as well. I think that since this is going to be a bit more of like a in-world encounter that we have, rather than what we have with like the irradiated Valakar, where it's a whole, sandbox activity in and of itself, I do think that it would be a good time to drop it alongside Siege of Orison, given the fact that that isn't. I don't want to say just recycle content because it's obviously not going to be the exact same, but it's not like new shiny content like we had with Rockcracker. Now, with all that being said, it's pretty hard to tell exactly what they want to do still. We do know that there should be at least three more patches till the end of the year, so 4.9, and then whatever two patches come after that. That ends in November, and then maybe like a fourth patch in December for like a big announcement, maybe something like Castra. I don't know. I might be coping a little bit, but we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Now, in the 4.8.1 loading screen, which is data mined, of course, we obviously aren't there yet. There is an article that actually talks about someone going down to Nyx 2, the yellow toxic planet in Nyx, and going to try and communicate with the claw salamanders. Now, the big detail there is the fact that the claw salamanders are going to be inhabiting some of Nyx 2, or be just one of the main gangs that we face down there. Not only is that kind of some world building for that planet, but it's the first time we're actually seeing some lore being mentioned about these planets, at least through some of these loading screens. Of course, they've been teased for a long time, but at this point, I really do think we are much closer to a release, and that's kind of why I speculate that 4.9 could have them. Now, getting really quickly just realistic about 4.9 and not as, out of the out of this world. If we don't get the new Nyx planets, which I'm not confident in, then that automatically obviously takes off the planets and Starkitect. And then if we, are getting Siege of Orson, which I am very confident in, that kind of already eliminates the municipal works, given the fact that that's a humongous piece of instance content, and I really don't think CIG wants to try and put two of those into one patch. After that, of course, we have the Sand Valakar, but we already discussed that a little bit. That's just up in the air and honestly is a pretty high possibility of happening. And then we have Starware. Now, depending on whether or not this is the Starware with just like the fashion side of it, where you can mix and match armor and clothing, or this is like Starware plus all the specializations and stats that come alongside the new armor systems, I'm not sure. But no matter what, these are still pretty big systems, and I think it's really just going to be something that drops whenever it's ready. Maybe it's something that they've been working on extensively, and it's much closer to release than I initially thought. But nonetheless, it's definitely not like Genesis Planets level of big in terms of like content and instability. So I do think that there is certainly a chance we see this in 4.9. There's just not much to go off of outside of the fact that it's something that we know is releasing in 2026. Now, there is also so many other smaller features, systems, and ships that are going to be releasing in the current year that we don't know of yet. But those are just a certain list of items that we were given by Jared in the past week. And truthfully, it's a really nice selection. And I think if we were to get any one or two of these for 4.9, it would be a really fantastic time. So, no matter what, even if it's not like the biggest things like Genesis or anything like that, I am super excited for what that patch could have in it. But to kind of finish this video off with a whole bunch of cope, let's talk about the potential of getting Castra in 2026. I know it's coming from a little bit more of a realistic side of things. This is definitely going to be pushing it a bit. Now, the reason why any of this has really popped into my head is just the way that CIG is trying to get to 1.0. They kind of talked about 2026 being the year of Nyx, and that's very clearly been happening, especially with the planets releasing this year. They're very clearly filling out this system to get it more in line with what it should be. Still definitely not to its full potential, but it's getting filled out a lot this year. Now, assuming that CIG wants to get 1 out within the next 2 to 3 years, as Chris Roberts has talked about in interviews before, it would make sense that they want to give Castra the same treatment as they did Nyx. Now, the big difference here is that for Nyx, it was all based off of data mines and a bit of speculation based off the lore and kind of what was happening during that time. And there wasn't really many official teases going on through CIG's communications. The big difference here is that for 4.8, we're already getting teases for Castra. If you were to load in right now and look to the left, you're going to see an article talking about a celebration disrupted by protesters for the pro-messer messaging and stuff like that. I don't really care about the lore too much in this situation, but it is worth pointing out that they talk about Sherman, which is the landing zone, and Cascom, which is one of the planets within Castra. There's also a very vivid picture of a lady with an X on it, obviously from the protesters, I could assume. Maybe this is going to be referencing like a gang or faction that we're going to be facing against in Castra. I can only assume that's kind of where that lore is heading, but nonetheless, this is still a humongous tease, in my opinion, for a system that was already shown off just about 2 years ago at the CitizenCon in 2024. Now, in 4.8.2's loading screen, so that is the one that we're getting for like Alien Week, there's a ton of mention of Xeon, like everything, which is very much associated with Castra given the proximity to Xeon space. So that's already one thing by itself. But there is also a very, very familiar picture that is shown off at the very front of 4.8.2, and that is the same image that we saw in the 4.8 loading screen, just without the huge X and kind of expanded a little bit. Now, of course, in this article, there's not much actual talk about Castra or anything like that. There's not really much mention of it, but given the fact that they have the same exact picture for both of these articles, makes me think that they are very much associated in terms of like the lore as to what's happening in Castra. Now, there is technically another mention of like the Huxa Treaty in the third loading screen, 4.8.3, but it really doesn't have nearly as much relation to like the other two articles, so I don't want to mention it too much. Nonetheless, I think getting these teases for Castra this early on in the year gives me a decent amount of faith that we could see it by the end of the year. They also have, of course, been working on Sherman for a while now. At this point, we saw pre-production footage almost 2 years ago, about a year and a half at this point, and that looked pretty decent for the time. That doesn't say obviously too much, but they have been working on it. So I don't want to cope too hard, but I do think that you know, there's definitely potential for this happening, and I want to get your guys' thoughts down below. I really think CIG is trying to ramp up towards 1.0 and getting things like these big systems out the door so they can start filling it out with content and whatnot. But I know that, getting another system already within a year seems like a stretch. They're working on the Genesis Planetech right now, and I really think that part of that goes into them getting those planets ready for Castra. Obviously, not right now, but maybe again for that end of year launch. This is something, again, I would love to hear your thoughts on. I know it's a bit of cope, but I'm going to go ahead and just call it. I really think we could see Castra by the end of the year in some way, shape, or form, even if it's not a completely filled out system. Having some form of it, I think, is definitely a potential. With that being said, I want to wrap it up because we have speculated very far, and I want to make sure that I maintain some sanity for the near future. Please let me know down below anything we talked about today, whether that's the Odin, Squadron 42, or 4.9 in Castra. I would love to hear your thoughts. Outside of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video.